My parents chose a white tent for their 35th anniversary party. White chairs, white tablecloths, white wine. Clean and respectable. That was the theme. 18 guests stood in their backyard in Raleigh, balancing paper plates and talking about property taxes, church committees, and summer travel. My sister Vanessa moved through the crowd like she owned the place. She kind of did. Half the people there were her friends. The other half were my mother's audience. I arrived in a navy dress and low heels, parked at the end of the driveway like I always do. Vanessa's BMW and her husband's Lexus were already in the shaded spots near the garage. Some traditions never change. Mom hugged Vanessa first. She always does. A long hug. The kind that says, "You are my proof that I did something right." When she got to me, it was quick, polite. "You made it. Good. Can you help me carry the extra plates outside?" Of course I could. By 6:30, the wine had loosened everyone up. My dad stood near the grill pretending to supervise. Vanessa was explaining a new procedure she'd added to her practice. Someone asked her about recovery time. Someone else asked about pricing. She smiled and answered like she was on a panel at a medical conference. No one asked me what I did. They never do. Mom clinked her glass with a fork. That sound still works even in 2026. Can I have everyone's attention? 18 heads turned. A few people kept chewing. She stood in front of the cake table, beaming. 35 years with this man, she said, touching my dad's arm. We've built a beautiful life. A beautiful family. Polite applause. She started with Vanessa. One daughter owns her own medical practice. She works harder than anyone I know. I don't even understand half the things she tells me, but I nod anyway. Laughter. Vanessa dipped her head modestly. She's good at that move. Mom lifted her glass higher. And the other? She looked straight at me. The other is the maid. There was a half-second pause. Just long enough for people to check if they heard that right. Then a few laughs. Not loud, not cruel, just uncomfortable. The kind people make when they don't know if it's a joke but don't want to be the only one not laughing. She makes beds for the army, Mom added, smiling like she just landed a punchline. More laughter. A couple of people clapped lightly. Vanessa didn't correct her. She didn't need to. I felt my face get warm, but not the way it used to when I was 22 and still trying to win approval. This felt different. Clearer. I've been in the Army 16 years. I've led cyber defense teams through network intrusions that could have shut down payroll for thousands of soldiers. I've signed evaluation reports that affect careers. I've sat across from colonels who expected me to fold. I didn't fold. But here in my parents' backyard, I was apparently housekeeping. Mom kept going. We're proud of both our girls, of course, she said, as if that cleaned it up. But it's nice to have a doctor in the family. That one got a bigger laugh. I looked around. 18 guests. Church friends, neighbors, 2 of Vanessa's colleagues, her husband's law partner, people who vote, who donate, who post inspirational quotes on Facebook about kindness. Vanessa reached for her glass. Mom turned toward her again. And to Vanessa's continued success, that's when I stood up. I didn't slam my chair. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood. Mom stopped mid-sentence, fork still in hand. I walked a few steps closer so I didn't have to shout across the yard. Mom. I said calm and steady. I don't make beds. A couple people shifted their weight. Someone set down a plate. I command a cyber defense unit at Fort Meade. The network my team protects handles medical records, payroll systems, and operational data, including the hospital Vanessa's practice bills through. Silence. I didn't rush it, and in 2 months, I added the Army is promoting me to Lieutenant Colonel. No one laughed. You could hear the hum of the air conditioner from inside the house. Vanessa's smile faded first. Then my dad looked up from his plate. Mom blinked like she was trying to replay the last 10 seconds. One of Vanessa's colleagues cleared his throat. Lieutenant Colonel, that's impressive. It's a competitive board, I said. About 30% make it. I didn't look at Vanessa. I looked at my mother. So no, I continued. I'm not the maid. I'm the officer in charge of the people who keep those systems running. There was nothing dramatic about it. No shouting. No tears. Just facts. Mom lowered her glass slowly. Well, she said, forcing a laugh, I was only joking. I know, I replied. That's the part I wanted everyone to hear. That landed harder than anything else I'd said. No one moved for a moment. 18 adults. All very interested in the grass. Dad finally spoke. "Congratulations," he muttered, like he'd just found out about a distant cousin's promotion on LinkedIn. "Thank you," I said. Vanessa took a sip of wine. "You never mentioned the promotion board." "It wasn't finalized," I answered. "Now it is." Another silence. Not awkward this time, heavy. Mom tried to recover. "Well, that's wonderful news. See, I told everyone we're proud." I didn't argue. There was no point. The cake got cut. Conversations restarted slower and quieter. A few guests came up to shake my hand. One asked what cyber defense actually meant. I explained in plain English. Another said his nephew was thinking about enlisting. Vanessa stayed near the table, scrolling on her phone. I went back to standing near the edge of the tent, watching the sky turn orange behind the trees. For years, I'd imagined this moment going differently. I thought I'd feel angry, or vindicated, or something dramatic enough to deserve background music. Instead, I felt steady. Mom avoided my eyes for the rest of the evening. Dad flipped burgers no one asked for. Vanessa laughed a little too loudly at something her husband said. At 7:45, as people started gathering their purses and jackets, one of the church friends touched my arm. "I had no idea," she said softly. "That's quite a responsibility." "It is," I answered. And for the first time that night, someone wasn't laughing. I stayed near the edge of the tent and watched Vanessa laugh with her colleagues like nothing had happened. That was her talent. Reset the room. Control the temperature. Make it seem like any tension was just a misunderstanding. She'd been doing that since we were kids. Growing up in Raleigh, our house looked like every other middle-class success story on the block. Brick exterior, 2-car garage, clean lawn. Inside it was a museum of Vanessa's achievements. Her high school valedictorian plaque hung in the hallway for years. Her acceptance letter to UNC Chapel Hill was framed. When she got into med school, Mom hosted a party with catered food. 50 people came. I remember because I spent most of that night refilling chip bowls. My milestones were acknowledged, just not celebrated. When I got into ROTC in college, Mom said, "That's a good backup plan." When I commissioned as a second lieutenant, Dad shook my hand like I'd just accepted a job at a regional bank. Vanessa's white coat ceremony. Though that was different. Mom cried in the front row. Posted photos for weeks. "So proud of Dr. Vanessa Walker," she wrote. Not future doctor. Not almost doctor. Just doctor. She claimed it early. At family dinners, conversations followed a pattern. Vanessa talked about patients, complicated cases, expensive equipment, insurance negotiations. Everyone leaned in. Then someone would remember I was there. So Adrian, a neighbor, once asked, "Are you still doing computers for the Army?" "Yes." "That's nice. Stable. Stable." That word followed me for years. It meant safe. It meant ordinary. It meant not impressive. Vanessa bought her first house at 32. Mom drove down to Charlotte to help her decorate. They picked out light fixtures and debated granite colors like it was a national decision. When I made Captain, Mom texted, "Congrats. Stay safe." That was it. The comparisons weren't always direct. They didn't need to be. They lived in tone. Vanessa worked so hard. Her hours are crazy. So were mine. Vanessa's student loans were brutal, but she pushed through. The Army paid for my degree. Somehow that made it less valuable. At Christmas one year, Vanessa's husband asked about my deployment schedule. Before I could answer, Vanessa said, "She's mostly stateside. It's not like she's kicking down doors." Everyone laughed. I wasn't kicking down doors. I was managing defensive cyber operations for a brigade-sized element. But that doesn't translate well over mashed potatoes. The thing about serving in cyber is that when you're doing your job well, nothing dramatic happens. Systems stay up. Payroll processes. Medical records don't get corrupted. No one notices. Vanessa's work had before and after photos. Mine had audit reports. There was a night in 2014 that still sticks with me. I had just failed the Cyber Advanced Leadership course. First time I'd ever failed a formal selection. I was 26, angry at myself, sitting in my apartment near Fort Gordon, staring at the email. Non-select. I called home because I thought maybe, just maybe, someone would say it didn't define me. Mom answered. I told her I hadn't been selected. She paused, then said, well, maybe leadership just isn't your lane. Not everyone is meant to run things. It wasn't cruel. It was casual. That made it worse. Vanessa happened to be visiting that weekend. I could hear her in the background. She can always stay where she is, Vanessa said. Stability isn't a bad thing. That word again. I retook the course the next year. Passed. Top third of the class. I didn't call home about that one. When I made major at 10 years in service, the ceremony was small. A few colleagues, my battalion commander, my team. They clapped. Someone handed me new rank insignia. I pinned it on myself in the mirror afterward. Mom asked if that meant a raise. Yes. Oh, good, she said. Because Vanessa just expanded her practice. Every achievement of mine seemed to land in comparison, never in isolation. There was always a scale. Vanessa on one side, me on the other. She built something. I served something. She owned her clinic. I saluted. She controlled her schedule. I answered to orders. That was the narrative. And the truth is, for a long time I let it be. Not because I believed it, but because correcting it felt exhausting. Explaining cyber defense to people who barely understood two-factor authentication is not a quick dinner conversation. It's easier to nod. Yeah, I do IT for the Army. End of topic. But what they didn't see were the nights when alerts came in at 0200 and I drove to base in the dark. The months preparing for inspections. The clearance paperwork that reads like an interrogation. The weight of knowing one mistake could compromise thousands of records. Vanessa once told me over wine, at least in my field I answered to myself. That wasn't true. She answered to boards, to insurance companies, to malpractice risk. But she believed it. And belief is powerful when it's never challenged. Back at the anniversary party after the cake and the forced congratulations, Vanessa approached me near the fence line. I didn't know you were up for Lieutenant Colonel, she said. It wasn't public. Well, she shrugged. That's big. For the Army. For the Army. I almost smiled. It's competitive, I replied. Selection board reviews everything. Performance evaluations. Command time. Education. She nodded like she understood. Still, she added, it's different from building something of your own. There it was again. Different. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. Not anymore. What Vanessa never understood was that I had built something. Not a clinic with my name on the door, but a team. A unit. A reputation inside an institution that doesn't promote people for personality. The Army doesn't care about your Instagram. It cares about whether systems stay secure and soldiers get paid on time. The sun dipped lower. Guests started leaving in small groups. Mom busied herself stacking plates, acting as if the toast had landed exactly as planned. Dad avoided eye contact with everyone. Vanessa hugged a colleague goodbye and laughed again, softer this time. As I walked toward my car at the end of the driveway, I could hear Mom's voice float across the yard. She's always been quiet, she was saying to someone. Never one to brag. That was true. I just never felt the need to. I drove back to Maryland the next morning before most of the neighborhood was awake. Raleigh looked the same as it always had. Quiet streets, trimmed lawns, church signs with cheerful messages about grace. I stopped for gas, grabbed coffee and got on a 95 North. 4.5 hours gives you time to think. But I've learned not to overdo that. I joined the Army at 22, not because I had no options. Not because I couldn't get into med school. I joined because I wanted structure, responsibility, and something bigger than a business card with my name on it. When I told my parents I'd signed my ROTC contract, Mom blinked like I'd just announced I was moving to Alaska. Are you sure? She asked. You've always been good with computers. You could work private sector. Make real money. I'll be fine, I said. Vanessa was already in her second year of med school then. Exhausted, competitive, focused. She didn't say much at the dinner table that night, just looked at me like I'd chosen the slower lane on purpose. Basic training wasn't dramatic. It was routine. Early mornings, accountability, learning to move as a unit instead of as an individual. I like that part. Clear expectations. Clear consequences. Officer training was different. You're not just expected to follow. You're expected to lead people who don't automatically trust you. especially when you're a young woman in a room full of 22-year-old men who grew up being told leadership looks a certain way. Cyber wasn't glamorous. No battlefield footage, no cinematic soundtrack. It was systems networks, protocols, patch management, vulnerability assessments. It was knowing that if you did your job right, no one outside your building would ever know your name. When I got my first duty assignment at Fort Gordon, Mom told her church friends I was working in communications. Close enough. The first time I briefed a senior officer on a network vulnerability, my hands were steady. I had data. I had timelines. I had mitigation steps. That officer didn't care that I was 24. He cared that I knew my job. That was the first place I felt evaluated on performance instead of personality. The Army doesn't care who your sister is. It cares if your report is accurate. In 2014, when I failed selection for the Cyber Advanced Leadership course, it hit hard. I'd prepared for months. Extra study hours, peer reviews, late nights rewriting scenario responses. The non-select email was short. No explanation. Just results. I didn't blame the board. I blamed myself. I went into work the next day anyway. Same routine. Same responsibility. No one treated me differently. That's one thing the Army does well. You're not your last mistake. You're your next action. At home it felt different. Mom's voice over the phone was calm. Maybe it's a sign to stay where you are. Stay where you are, Vanessa added from his background. Not everyone needs to climb. Stability isn't a weakness. It wasn't encouragement. It was containment. So I studied again, asked for mentorship, took every critique seriously. The following year I reapplied. This time I passed. Solid ranking. Not top of the class, but strong. I didn't call home about that one. By the time I pinned on captain, I had already led small teams during simulated cyber defense exercises. Real stress, real consequences, simulated attacks that exposed how quickly things fall apart when people freeze. I didn't freeze. At 28, I understood something clearly. I wasn't trying to compete with Vanessa. I was trying to be competent. There's a difference. Vanessa built her world around control, private practice, client list, revenue streams. Mine was built around responsibility, soldiers under my supervision, systems that couldn't afford to fail. One Thanksgiving, a neighbor asked how long I planned to stay in. I'm not staying in, I replied. I'm building a career. He nodded politely like that was cute. When I made major at 10 years in service, it wasn't a flashy promotion. It came after evaluations, command time, professional military education, and a review board that doesn't care how many likes your LinkedIn post gets. Major meant more responsibility, larger teams, bigger consequences. Mom asked, "Does that mean you're in charge now?" "In some ways," I said. "Well," she replied, "Vanessa just hired 2 new surgeons." It wasn't competitive. It was comparative. The Army measures leadership in impact. My family measured it in visibility. The first time I had to counsel a junior officer who'd made a serious mistake, I realized leadership isn't loud. It's uncomfortable. It's corrective. It's personal. That conversation mattered more than any plaque on a wall. Vanessa's world had ribbon cuttings and magazine features. Mine had after-action reviews. In 2021, I transferred to Fort Meade and stepped into a larger operational role. The mission set expanded. Higher classification, greater scrutiny, clearance reinvestigation, financial checks, interviews with people I hadn't spoken to in years. When you hold a TS/SC, I clearance, your life isn't entirely yours. The government asks questions. You answer them. Mom once complained that I was too private. Privacy isn't optional at that level. It's required. At family dinners, Vanessa's stories were easy to follow. Patience, procedures, expansion plans. Mine were abstract. We mitigated a vulnerability. What does that mean? It means nothing broke. That answer never impressed anyone, but nothing breaking is the goal. I didn't choose the Army because I lacked ambition. I chose it because I wanted to test myself inside a system that doesn't hand out praise casually. Every promotion was earned through documented performance. Every evaluation written by someone who had seen me under pressure. Vanessa's path was impressive. No question. Mine was just less visible. As I crossed into Maryland and the skyline shifted toward D.C., I felt the familiar pull back into that world. Secure gates, badge access, chain of command, expectations that don't change based on who your sibling is. At home in Raleigh, I was the quiet daughter in uniform. At Fort Meade, I was responsible for people who trusted me to make the right call when things went wrong. And the thing about that kind of responsibility is it doesn't need applause to be real. The alert came in at 2:17 a.m. My government phone vibrated on the nightstand, sharp and persistent. Not a routine update, not a training exercise. The subject line was short, unusual network activity. Immediate review required. I was at Fort Meade by 2:49. The building looked the same as it always does at that hour. Dim hallways, fluorescent lights humming, security desk, half awake, but alert enough to check badges twice. Cyber incidents don't come with sirens. They come with logs. By 3:05, my team was in the operations room. Laptops open, coffee untouched, eyes locked on screens. One of our monitoring tools had flagged abnormal outbound traffic from a system tied to a support contractor. Not catastrophic. Not yet. But not normal. When you work cyber defense long enough, you learn to respect the word unusual. It means something changed. And in our world, change can cost millions or compromise people. I was the field grade officer on duty that week. Responsibility rolled uphill, and that hill stopped at my desk until I escalated. Confirmed source, I told my NCO. I see, no assumptions. He nodded and started tracing the path. Packet capture, IP review, log correlation. We didn't panic. Panic wastes time. By 3:40, it was clear this wasn't just a misconfigured script. There was persistence. Attempts to access restricted segments. Slow, careful probing. Someone was testing the fence. I contacted the on-call civilian lead and the Brigade S6. We moved to containment procedures. Segmentation. Temporary credential lockdown for affected accounts. Increased monitoring thresholds. If you've never been inside a cyber operations floor during a real event, it's quieter than you'd expect. No shouting, no dramatic countdown clocks, just controlled voices and the sound of keys moving fast. At 4:15, I made the call to notify the battalion commander. He answered on the second ring. Talk to me. I gave him the summary. No dramatics, just facts. Scope, impact, actions taken. Can you contain it, he asked. Yes, sir, I said. We're isolating the node now. Keep me updated every 30 minutes. That was it. No lecture, no doubt. Just trust. Trust is expensive in the Army. You don't get it for free. By 5:30, we confirmed the breach attempt had not accessed classified data. The firewall adjustments and segmentation held. The intrusion was blocked before lateral movement could do damage. But we weren't done. Blocking something isn't the same as understanding it. By 8 a.m., the building was filling up with day shift personnel. Word had spread in the quiet way it does on secure floors. People glanced toward our section, trying to gauge if it was serious. It was serious. Not catastrophic, but serious. We ran a full forensic review, identified the compromised contractor credentials, coordinated with higher-level cyber elements for intelligence correlation, documented every step. At 10:45, after 8 straight hours in the operations room, I stepped into a conference room to brief the brigade commander in person. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back slightly. You kept this contained at the lowest level, he said. Good call, not overreacting. Overreaction in cyber can shut down legitimate operations. Underreaction can invite disaster. The balance matters. Yes, sir. He looked at the timeline again. You were first on site. Yes, sir. He nodded once. This is what field-grade leadership looks like. That sentence stayed with me longer than any certificate ever could. Field-grade leadership. Not loud, not visible to the public, but decisive. The day stretched on. Reports written. Coordination calls. Follow-up measures implemented to prevent recurrence. By late afternoon, the immediate threat had been neutralized and documented. I finally walked out of the building close to 6 p.m., 14 hours after that first vibration on my nightstand. The parking lot was nearly empty. Maryland humidity hung in the air. I sat in my car for a moment before starting the engine. My phone buzzed again. A text from Mom. Vanessa just got featured in Charlotte Living magazine, so proud. I stared at the screen for a few seconds. There was a link attached. I didn't open it. Instead, I leaned back and let the quiet settle. Inside that building earlier that morning, my decisions had protected systems that handled payroll for soldiers deployed overseas, medical records for military families, operational data tied to missions people would never hear about. No one outside that installation would ever know my name because of it. That's how it's supposed to work. The following week, during the formal after-action review, my performance evaluation reflected the incident. Calm under pressure. Effective coordination. Appropriate escalation. The kind of language that promotion boards notice. I didn't call home about that either. At the next family gathering months later, someone asked how work was going. Busy, I answered. Vanessa talked about expanding into a new cosmetic line. Mom told her friend Adrian works with computers. Very technical. Technical. I nodded. The night of that intrusion didn't make headlines. It didn't trend. It didn't come with applause. But inside the Army, reputations are built in rooms like that. Reputations that don't depend on whether someone understands what you do at a backyard party. When my senior raider met with me later that year to discuss long-term trajectory, he didn't talk about potential. He talked about timing. You're tracking well for battalion-level leadership, he said. Stay steady. Stay steady. Different words. Different tone. This time it wasn't about staying small. It was about staying consistent. As I drove through the gates that evening, scanning my ID at the checkpoint, I realized something I hadn't fully put into words before. In my family's world, visibility was value. In mine, responsibility was. I pulled into my townhouse parking spot just after sunset and sat there longer than I needed to. Responsibility made sense to me. Family didn't. At Fort Meade, expectations were written down. Performance was documented. Feedback came in bullet points. At home in Raleigh, everything was implied. The first Christmas I missed because of duty rotation, Mom told everyone I was tied up with computer stuff. Vanessa hosted dinner that year. Professional catering. Coordinated table settings. A photographer for family photos. I watched it unfold through group texts. Vanessa posted a photo later that night. The caption read, "Grateful for family." Everyone was tagged, except me. I wasn't there, so technically it made sense. Still, when I called Mom the next morning from my apartment, she sounded distracted. "We missed you," she said. "But you understand how important it is to show up when you can." I had been on a 12-hour shift covering for an officer whose child was in the hospital. I understood showing up. The following summer, my parents hosted a small dinner for one of Dad's business associates. 15 people. Nice wine. Linen napkins. I happened to be in North Carolina that weekend on leave and assumed I'd be included. I found out about it from a Facebook post. When I called Mom, she hesitated. "Oh, honey, it was mostly professionals. I didn't know if your uniform would be appropriate." I wasn't planning to wear a uniform. "I have clothes," I replied. "Well," she added quickly, "Vanessa already knew most of them." It just made sense. It always made sense. In 2023, Vanessa expanded her practice into a second location. Ribbon-cutting ceremony. Local news coverage. Mom flew down to Charlotte to help with the event. She wore a bright blue dress and stood front row for photos. I sent Vanessa a congratulations text. "Proud of you," I wrote. She responded with a thumbs-up emoji and a picture of the new lobby. That same month, I completed a successful command evaluation that put me in the top block for my peer group. My senior raiders' comments were clear, strong potential for battalion-level leadership. I didn't post about it. I didn't text the family group chat. When I visited Raleigh that fall, Mom asked how work was going. "Busy," I said. She nodded. "Vanessa's exhausted too. Success takes energy." There it was again. Success. At dinner that night, one of Mom's church friends turned to me. "So, Adrian, do you ever think about leaving the Army and doing something more permanent?" I smiled politely. "This is permanent." She blinked. "Oh, I just meant long-term." "I'm at 16 years, I replied. "That's long-term." Vanessa sipped her wine and jumped in. "She thrives in structure," she said. "Some people need that." Need that. As if I'd chosen the Army because I required supervision. I let it go. I always let it go. But the pattern wasn't just about comparison. It was about containment. Vanessa was framed as expansive, entrepreneurial, self-made. I was framed as stable, disciplined, contained. One Sunday afternoon, while helping Mom clear dishes after lunch, she spoke quietly. "You know we're proud of you, right?" I set a plate into the dishwasher. "You don't have to tell me. I just worry," she continued, "that you don't build anything that's yours." I closed the dishwasher door gently. "What do you think I've been doing for 16 years?" I asked. She waved a hand. "You follow orders. That's different." I didn't respond. Explaining chain of command, mission ownership, and operational authority over casserole dishes felt pointless. The Army isn't about blind obedience. It's about structured responsibility. But that nuance doesn't translate over sweet tea. Later that evening, I overheard Mom speaking with a neighbor on the porch. "Vanessa is our success story," she said casually. "Adrian chose a different path." Different. The word followed me back to Maryland like a shadow. At work, my calendar filled with planning meetings, budget reviews, personnel evaluations, operational briefings. No one in that building referred to me as different. They referred to me by rank. Major Walker. That title came with expectations. It came with consequences. It came with trust. Back in Raleigh, I was still the quieter daughter. The one who didn't make scenes. The one who didn't correct the narrative. But something shifted after the anniversary party. Not anger, not resentment. Clarity. For years, I'd assumed that if I explained my job better, they'd understand. If I translated cyber defense into simpler language, they'd see it. But understanding requires curiosity. And curiosity had never been part of the equation. Vanessa didn't ask what it meant to hold a TS/SCI clearance. Mom didn't ask what a promotion board reviewed. Dad didn't ask what decisions I had to make at 3 a.m. They assumed they knew. And assumptions are comfortable. A few weeks after the anniversary party, I was back at Fort Meade reviewing evaluation packets for officers under my supervision. I read through accomplishments, leadership challenges, areas for growth. I realized I was doing for them what I had always wanted someone to do for me. Assess based on substance, not optics. That evening, my phone buzzed with a family group message. Vanessa had booked a European vacation. Photos of villas and wine tours. Mom responded with heart emojis. No one asked about my week. I set my phone face down on my desk and turned back to the performance reviews. Second place implies a competition. I had never signed up for one, but I had spent years standing quietly on a podium no one else acknowledged. That silence wasn't accidental. It was chosen. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I was willing to keep choosing it. The email came in at 9:12 a.m. on a Tuesday. Subject line, FY26 Lieutenant Colonel Promotion Board Results. I was in my office at Fort Meade reviewing a training schedule when it hit my inbox. No dramatic music, no warning. Just another line in a crowded screen. I closed my door before opening it. Promotion boards in the Army aren't casual. Your entire career gets laid out in front of a group of senior officers who don't know you personally. They see evaluation reports, command time, education, awards, any disciplinary actions, patterns. You don't charm a board, you survive it. I clicked the email. You have been selected for promotion to Lieutenant Colonel. That was it. No exclamation point, no fireworks, just confirmation. I leaned back in my chair and read it again. Selected. 16 years of service compressed into one word. I didn't smile right away, mostly because I understood what it meant. Lieutenant Colonel isn't just another stripe. It's battalion-level leadership. It's bigger budgets, more soldiers, higher visibility, fewer excuses. My phone buzzed almost immediately. A text from another major in my peer group. "You see it?" "I did," I replied. "Congrats, sir." "Congrats to you." The hallway outside my office was quiet. No one knew yet. Results were released individually. Some would celebrate. Some would sit with disappointment. The Army moves forward either way. I stepped into my battalion commander's office 10 minutes later. "Sir, promotion board results are out." He looked up from his computer and selected. He stood, extended his hand. Firm handshake. No theatrics. "Good. You earned it. Not lucky, not overdue. Earned." We talked about projected timelines, pinning ceremony window, expected transition into battalion executive officer once the order's finalized, more responsibility, fewer margins for error. When I left his office, the building looked exactly the same. Fluorescent lights, Badge readers, secure doors. Nothing changes visually when your rank does. The weight changes. I went back into my office and closed the door again. My phone sat on my desk. I could have called Mom. I could have texted the family group chat. Instead, I opened my evaluation files and went back to work. The decision wasn't dramatic. It was practical. For years, I had shared milestones hoping they would land differently, hoping they'd be understood on their own merit. They rarely were. Every accomplishment became a comparison. Vanessa just opened another location. Vanessa was featured in a magazine. Vanessa is building something permanent. I wasn't interested in turning my promotion into another side-by-side chart. At lunch, a few colleagues gathered in the break room. Word travels fast inside a brigade. LTC. Select one, of the captain said as I walked in. Still Major for now, I corrected him. He grinned. Not for long. We talked about logistics, timeline, career moves. No one asked how my sister was doing. That felt new. Later that afternoon, I stepped into a conference room to brief a working group on an upcoming inspection. Same tone, same expectations. The Army doesn't lower standards because you're promotable. If anything, it raises them. Halfway through the briefing, my phone vibrated again. A message from Mom. Vanessa just secured a major investor. So proud of her. I read it without reacting. I typed nothing. There's a difference between withholding and protecting. I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I just wasn't volunteering my life for comparison anymore. That evening, after the building cleared out, I sat alone in my office and drafted a short email to my team. I'm tracking for promotion to Lieutenant Colonel pending orders. This reflects our collective work. Appreciate your professionalism. No self-congratulation, no speech. Leadership isn't a solo sport. When I finally left the installation, the Maryland sky was dim and humid. I called my father on the drive home. He answered on the third ring. Everything okay? Yes. I wanted to let you know I was selected for promotion. There was a pause. To what? Lieutenant Colonel. Silence then. That's high, right? It's field grade, battalion level. Well, he cleared his throat. That's good. Congratulations. Thank you. He hesitated. Have you told your mother? Not yet. He didn't press. We hung up after a few minutes of small talk. I didn't call Mom that night. I didn't call Vanessa, not because I was angry, because I was tired of translating my career into language that minimized it. Over the next week, internal announcements circulated. My name appeared on a promotion list distributed within the command. A few senior officers stopped by my office to shake my hand. Big Step 1 said, "Expect more pressure." I nodded. Pressure I understood. At home, the family group chat stayed busy. Vacation plans, investment updates, photos of Vanessa at a charity event in a red dress. I watched the messages roll by. Then I turned off notifications. The Army had selected me for a role that required strategic thinking, steady judgment, and accountability over hundreds of soldiers. I didn't need 18 backyard witnesses to validate that. And for the first time, I felt no urge to explain myself to anyone who hadn't bothered to ask. I stepped down from the stage and into a line of officers waiting to shake hands. The applause tapered into conversation the way it always does at professional events. Controlled, measured, a few firm handshakes, a couple of quiet, "Well done, ma'am." Someone asked for a copy of my remarks. I kept my responses short. "Thank you. Appreciate it. Glad to be here." From the corner of my eye, I could see my family still seated. Vanessa wasn't scrolling her phone anymore. Mom's hands were folded tightly in her lap. Dad looked like he was trying to process new math. When the formal program moved into the networking reception, the ballroom shifted tone. Clusters formed. Business cards appeared. Civilian contractors leaned toward uniformed officers with polite enthusiasm. I took a breath and stepped into the crowd. A colonel from another brigade approached first. "Solid message," he said. "Especially the part about invisible leadership." "Thank you, sir." He nodded toward my rank. "Lieutenant Colonel's going to feel different." "I expect it will." We talked briefly about transition timelines and unit structure. Real conversation. Real stakes. When I turned, Mom was standing a few feet away. Up close, she looked smaller than she had on stage. Less certain. "Adrian," she said almost cautiously. "Yes, ma'am. You didn't tell us. I invited you." "That's not what I meant." "I knew. You never said you were speaking," she continued. "Or that you were being recognized." "You never asked what I actually do," I replied. There wasn't anger in my voice, just clarity. Vanessa joined us, her husband a step behind. That was impressive, Vanessa said. The word sounded unfamiliar coming from her. Thank you. She glanced at my rank insignia. Lieutenant Colonel. Select, I corrected automatically. Pending pin on. She nodded slowly. I didn't realize it was that high level, she added. It is. A defense contractor approached Vanessa's husband, pulling him into a conversation about compliance law. Vanessa hesitated, then stepped aside to join them. Mom stayed. Why didn't you share this with us earlier? She asked. I looked around the ballroom. Officers laughing. Senior leaders shaking hands. Junior soldiers watching carefully. Every time I've shared something I said evenly, it turned into a comparison. Mom opened her mouth, then closed it. That's not fair. Maybe not, I replied. But it's consistent. She crossed her arms, slightly defensive reflex. I was joking at the anniversary party, she said. I know. I didn't mean you were actually a maid. I know. She studied my face as if trying to find anger. There wasn't any. I just didn't understand, she said quietly. That's the point. Silence stretched between us, but it didn't feel hostile. It felt factual. Dad approached next, hands in his jacket pockets. That was something he said. Yes, sir. He nodded toward the stage. You had the room. I had the mission. He let out a short breath that might have been a laugh. I should have asked more over the years, he said. About what you actually do. Yes, I replied. He didn't argue. Across the room, Vanessa finished her conversation and returned. Her expression had shifted from polite surprise to something else. Calculation, maybe. Recalibration. You mentioned payroll systems, she said. And medical records. Yes. For military facilities and connected networks. She absorbed that quietly. So when Mom said you make beds, I held her gaze. It wasn't accurate. She gave a small nod. Vanessa had always respected competence. She just hadn't recognized mine as belonging in the same category as hers. A young captain approached me, interrupting the moment. Ma'am, I just wanted to say your point about mentoring junior officers really hit home. We spoke briefly about his team, about career progression, about not measuring leadership by volume. When he walked away, Mom was still there. I didn't know, she repeated. I didn't hide, I answered. Vanessa shifted her weight. You could have corrected us sooner, she said. I could have, I agreed. But it wasn't my job to compete. That landed differently than the anniversary party remark. Vanessa didn't respond immediately. Mom glanced around the ballroom again, taking in the uniforms, the insignia, the conversations happening at levels she wasn't used to navigating. It's just different from what we're used to, she admitted. Different doesn't mean smaller. Dad cleared his throat softly. It doesn't. The reception continued around us. Laughter. Professional exchange. Movement. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't the quiet daughter on the edge of the room. I was the officer people were approaching. Vanessa looked at me again. Congratulations, she said, more firmly this time. Thank you. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was acknowledgement. Mom straightened slightly. I suppose we'll need new photos for the house, she said, attempting lightness. That's up to you, I replied. She studied me again, perhaps expecting warmth or bitterness. She got neither. What happened on that stage wasn't revenge. It wasn't exposure. It wasn't a takedown. It was context. And context, once visible, doesn't disappear easily. A senior civilian leader approached and asked to speak briefly about interagency coordination. I excused myself and stepped into that conversation without hesitation. Behind me, I could sense my family standing in a room that finally made sense of something they had underestimated. I didn't need to check their expressions. The shift had already happened. I walked out of the ballroom without waiting for my family to catch up. The night air outside the convention center felt steady and cool. Washington traffic moved in clean lines under streetlights. No applause out here. No rank announcements. Just regular noise. My phone buzzed before I reached the curb. Mom. I let it ring once before answering. Adrienne. Yes, ma'am. Her voice sounded different. Not performative, not polished. You embarrassed me at the anniversary party, she said. I corrected you. You could have done that privately. You made it public. Silence. Cars passed. A siren somewhere in the distance. I didn't realize, she said finally, that it bothered you that much. It didn't bother me, I replied. It clarified things. She didn't respond immediately. Tonight was impressive, she continued. I just wish I'd known. I sent an invitation. That's not the same as telling us you were the speaker. I leaned against the side of the building. I've told you what I do for 16 years, I said calmly. You just translated it differently. There was a long pause. I never meant to minimize you, she said. I know. That wasn't sarcasm. I believed her. Intent and impact aren't the same thing. Vanessa's name flashed on my screen in a text while I was still on the call. We need to talk. I didn't open it. Mom's tone shifted. Vanessa works hard, too. I know. You don't have to compete with her. I'm not. She exhaled sharply, frustration creeping in. Then why does this feel like a competition? Because it always has, I said. She didn't argue. Dad took the phone next. You did well, he said quietly. Thank you. I should have asked more over the years. Yes. Another pause. I thought you were fine, he added. You never complained. I didn't need to complain to notice. He didn't try to defend it. That's fair, he said. Fair. We ended the call without drama. Inside the venue, the reception was still going. I could see silhouettes moving through the glass doors. Vanessa and her husband stood near the entrance, now talking in low voices. My phone buzzed again. Vanessa. I answered this time. That was a big moment, she said without preamble. It was a professional event. You know what I mean. Yes. She didn't sound defensive. She sounded recalculating. I didn't realize you were at that level, she admitted. I've been at that level. No, I mean, she stopped. I didn't understand what it meant. That's honest. I guess I assumed you were comfortable. I am. That's not what I meant. I know. Vanessa sighed softly. When Mom called you the maid, she said versions of that before, and you never corrected her. I just did. Silence on her end. You could have told us about the promotion board, she said. I could have. Why didn't you? I thought about that. Because I didn't want it to become another comparison. She didn't deny it. That's not fair, she said eventually. It's accurate. The conversation wasn't heated. It was clinical. Vanessa had built her world on control and recognition. Tonight disrupted that balance. I'm proud of you, she said finally. The words sounded careful. Thank you. She cleared her throat. This doesn't change things. It changes context, I replied. We ended the call there. I stood alone for a few minutes longer before walking back inside to collect my things. By the time I reached the coat check, my parents were waiting. Mom stepped forward first. We're going to head back to the hotel, she said. Okay. I just want you to know, she added. I never saw you a second. I met her eyes. You didn't have to see it for it to be there. She winced slightly at that, but she didn't argue. Dad nodded once. Vanessa offered a small smile. Good speech, she said again. Thank you. They left without hugs. I watched them walk toward the exit doors. There was no explosion, no shouting, no dramatic reconciliation, just space. Over the next few days, my phone filled with messages from colleagues. Congratulations. Welcome to the club. Looking forward to working together. The family group chat went quiet. Then Mom sent a photo of the four of us from the reception. I was in uniform. Vanessa in a dark green dress. Dad slightly off-center. Mom smiling tightly. Caption proud of both our daughters. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I set the phone down. I didn't need a new caption. I needed a new boundary. The Army had promoted me based on documented performance, peer evaluation, and command potential. That wasn't something that could be diminished by a toast. At Fort Meade, nothing changed in tone. Meetings continued. Planning cycles advanced. My responsibilities increased incrementally as the transition timeline moved forward. I focused on that. At home in Raleigh, something subtle had shifted. Not admiration, not rivalry, awareness. And awareness, once it settles in, doesn't require confrontation to remain. I deleted the photo from the group chat without responding, not out of anger, out of precision. For years I had accepted whatever version of me my family was comfortable with. The quiet one, the stable one, the computer girl, the maid joke, the backup plan, the daughter who chose structure over spotlight. That version required very little from them. This one required adjustment. The following Monday, I stepped into the battalion commander's office to review transition timelines. My official promotion orders were processing. Projected pin-on date confirmed. Executive officer position solidified. You'll be carrying more weight now, he said. More visibility. I understand. Visibility changes expectations. I'm aware. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. Good. Keep your center. That phrase stuck with me. Keep your center. Leadership at that level isn't loud. It's consistent. You don't prove yourself through speeches. You prove yourself through decisions made when no one is clapping. Later that week, I called my parents. Not to argue. Not to recap the symposium. Just to set something clear. Mom answered. How's work? She asked, tone lighter than before. Busy, I replied. I'll be pinning on Lieutenant Colonel next month. She paused. Will there be a ceremony? Yes. Should we come? That's up to you. Another pause. We'd like to, she said carefully. Then you're welcome. I didn't elaborate. Vanessa called separately the next evening. I've been thinking, she began. About how I framed you. I let that sit. I didn't see it as competition, she said. But maybe it was. It doesn't matter, I replied. What matters is what you do next. She was quiet for a few seconds. I want to come to the ceremony, she said. You can. I won't make it about me. That's a start. There was no dramatic reconciliation. No emotional breakthrough. Just recalibration. At work, the days moved quickly. Budget reviews, training rotations, personnel actions. My calendar stayed full. The Army doesn't slow down because your family is processing something. The pinning ceremony was held on a Thursday afternoon inside our brigade auditorium. Modest space. Rows of folding chairs, American flag to one side, unit guidon to the other. No ballroom, no industry sponsors, just soldiers. My team filled the first few rows. Officers I had mentored, NCOs who had carried missions alongside me, civilians who kept the systems running. My family arrived 10 minutes early. Mom wore navy again. Dad adjusted his tie, same habit. Vanessa stood slightly behind them, quieter than usual. When my name was called, I walked forward in dress uniform. The insignia change is small in size, but heavy in meaning. Silver oak leaves replacing gold. Mom pinned one side. Dad pinned the other. Vanessa stepped forward and adjusted it slightly to make sure it was straight. No speeches about doctors. No jokes about maids. The brigade commander spoke briefly about leadership responsibility and trust. He referenced the 2:17 a.m. incident without details. He mentioned steady performance under pressure. He didn't mention my sister. After the ceremony, soldiers lined up to shake my hand. Congratulations, ma'am. Proud to serve under you, sir. That part mattered more than anything else. Mom watched quietly. Vanessa approached one of my captains and asked what his role was. She listened. Actually listened. On the drive back to my townhouse, Mom rode in the passenger seat while Dad and Vanessa followed in a rental car. You look comfortable there, she said. I am. I didn't understand your world, she admitted. I know. I should have tried harder. Yes. She glanced at me. You're not angry? No. Then what are you? Clear. That seemed to land. Back at my place, we sat around the small dining table. No catered food. No linen napkins. Just takeout containers and bottled water. Vanessa looked around. You've always kept things simple, she said. It works. She nodded slowly. I used to think success meant visibility, she admitted. But tonight felt different. It is. Dad leaned back in his chair. You don't need us to validate you, he said. No. Mom reached for her water glass. But we'd like to understand, she added. That was new. Understanding isn't automatic. It's chosen. I'm not going to compete with Vanessa, I said evenly. And I'm not going to accept comparisons anymore. Mom nodded. That's fair. Vanessa didn't argue. The evening ended without tension. They left before it got too late. No dramatic hugs. No emotional speeches. Just a different tone. The next week, Mom changed her Facebook bio. It no longer listed only one daughter. It simply read Proud Mother. She didn't tag either of us. At Fort Meade, my title changed on official documents. My responsibilities expanded. The work remained invisible to most of the country. And that was fine, because I had stopped needing visibility at home. The anniversary party had revealed something important. The symposium had clarified it. The ceremony confirmed it. I wasn't the maid. I wasn't second place. I wasn't the quieter option. I was an officer trusted with command-level responsibility in the United States Army. And I didn't need 18 guests or even my own family to make that real. I didn't win anything that night at the anniversary party. There was no applause. No dramatic confrontation. No one suddenly realizing they had been wrong for years. What changed wasn't the room. It was me. For a long time, I thought family validation was something you earned. If I worked hard enough, stayed patient enough, proved myself clearly enough, eventually they would see me the way I wanted to be seen. But here's the truth I learned in uniform, and in that ballroom, you don't build your life for applause. You build it for alignment. My parents called me the maid. They compared me to my sister. They framed my military career as stable, technical, safe. They weren't villains. They were limited. And I stopped shrinking myself to fit inside their limits. This wasn't about humiliating them. It wasn't about revenge in the loud, dramatic sense. It was a family revenge story in the quietest way possible. I didn't tear them down. I stepped into who I already was. If you've ever been the overlooked daughter, the one compared to the golden child, the one whose military service or career path didn't fit your family's definition of success, I hope this story reminds you of something simple. You don't have to compete to be worthy. You don't have to explain yourself to people who refuse to listen. And you don't need permission to lead your own life. If this family drama resonated with you, if you connect with military stories, family revenge stories, and real-life moments where boundaries change everything, subscribe to the channel. There are more stories like this about quiet strength, about choosing dignity over noise, and about building a life that speaks for itself. And if you've ever been underestimated by your own family, I'd like to hear your story too.